Welcome back, boys and girls, to Poppy and Rye by Avi. Today we're reading chapter 13, What Happened to Rye? As Rye had listened to Poppy speak about ragweed, he hardly knew what to think. He was confused. He was upset. He felt humiliated. Ragweed was always getting in his way. He had done so when he was alive. Now he was doing so even after he died. And yet, Rye knew perfectly well that Ragweed's death was awful. Truly, he felt terrible about it. And yet, from the moment he had begun his dance on the meadow with this graceful mouse, this one named Poppy, he had fallen in love with her. He hoped and thought she felt something of the same for him. But now that she had discovered that he was Ragweed's brother and admitted she loved Ragweed, surely there was no hope for him. And yet, he found himself thinking that perhaps now that Ragweed had died, Poppy might turn to him. And yet, Rye felt deeply ashamed of himself. How self-centered and selfish he was. Such horrible thoughts. How low, how bad. Poppy would never be able to see anything decent in him. But the very next moment he thought, I'm not a bad mouse. I'm not. It was with these thoughts that Rye raced from the nest. He did not go far. He could not outrun his feelings. More importantly, he did not want to go away from this dear mouse, this Poppy. He found himself at the edge of the beaver's pond. It was raining steadily. The world looked the way he felt, gray and sodden. Moreover, except for him, everything seemed immense. He was nothing but a small, bad, useless mouse. Hunkering down, consumed by the sensation that the whole world despised him, Rye shivered with wet and cold. Is there any place in this wide world for such a wretch as I? He asked himself. Simultaneously, he darted a look over his shoulder to see if, just possibly, someone, he dared not say who, had followed him. When he saw that no one had, he was angry. He'd even checked. A mournful Rye gazed down at the pond. A mist was rising off the water as if it were smoldering. A few beavers were hard at work. Suddenly Rye saw that the pond was much higher than it had been before. Anger swept through him. How he hated the beavers. Yet there they were, making the dam higher. Even as misery rained down on his head. Had they no feelings? Would they never stop? As he looked on, Rye began to have an idea. If he could find some way to put an end to what the beavers were doing, might not he in some way redeem himself? Surely if he kept them from building the dam higher, or better yet, force them to move away, he would become a hero to his family. He and he alone would defeat them. Why, even Poppy might see him as different from Ragweed then. Rye surveyed the pond. The beaver's main lodge was not far from the dam. He remembered his father telling him that the way the beavers got into the lodge was by swimming through an underwater passage. If he could get into the lodge, he might. Actually, Rye was not at all sure what he might do. He supposed he would think of something once he got in the lodge. The main thing was to get there. Surely he could do that. Like all his brothers and sisters, he was a good swimmer. Rye raced down to the edge of the pond. The beaver's dam was built where the brook had narrowed out a V shape in the land. The dam, made of twigs, 20 feet across and 3 feet wide. By going out along the dam, he would be that much closer to the lodge. But when Rye reached one end of the dam, a beaver was working on it. He had brought up a heap of mud and dumped it, and was now using his tail to smooth it down. Though impatient, Rye bided his time. One whack of the beaver's tail, not to mention what he could do with his teeth, and Rye would be crushed. The beaver on the dam gave some final pats to the mud, surveyed his work, uttered a few grunts, moved ponderously toward the edge of the dam, and then dove into the water and swam away. Rye crawled out upon the dam, this way impeded by the twigs and branches which were crisscrossed and bent in all directions. By the time he got near the lodge, he was caked with mud and bits of leaves. Not caring how he looked, Rye crept down as close to the water as possible. There he hesitated. Then an image of Poppy rose in his mind's eye. If he could succeed, he would be a hero. Holding his nose with one paw, Rye jumped into the water, tail first. He landed with a splat, momentarily floundered, then he righted himself. Shaking his eyes and whiskers free of water, he began to swim toward the lodge. 3 feet from the lodge, he paused and began to tread water. He had reached the most difficult part, the entrance. Suddenly, he realized he had no idea where, other than underwater, the entry hole might be. It could be on the side he was on, or the opposite side. He would have to try his luck. Filling his lungs with air, he let himself drop down and began to swim underwater. It had been gray on the water's surface. It was much darker deeper below. Before him, the lodge loomed like a shadowy lump. It sat upon the bottom of the pond and rose up, a huge dome, enormous, impenetrable. Stroking steadily, Rye rushed on, a trail of tiny bubbles escaping from his clenched mouth. Gradually, he began to make out what appeared to be a dark hole. Was that the entry hole? Lungs close to bursting, Rye had to make a decision. If he guessed wrong, he would drown. At least I tried, he told himself. Farewell, Poppy, he murmured. Farewell, love. Farewell, world. Kicking hard, paws madly stroking the water, he propelled himself into the hole. The moment he did so, everything turned as dark as night without a moon. Rye was no longer trying to get into the lodge. He was struggling to save his life. His strokes were wild, his kicks frenzied. Unable to endure any more, he shot up and found air. Gasping for breath, he waved his paws feebly to keep afloat and slowly moved toward a ledge of slippery mud. Reaching it, he clawed his way up, falling back a few times, finally heaving himself up on the slimy shelf. Eyes shut, he lay there, coughing and spitting water. He opened his eyes. He was in the lodge. A few feet away sat an enormous beaver. The beaver was looking right at him. Well, bless my teeth and smooth my tail, Mr. Canard said with a smile full of orange teeth. Glad you came, pal. A stranger is just a friend you haven't met. Hey, and I mean that sincerely. And that's the end of chapter 13.